start with you, Bilous.
Sure, Ken, thanks. And thanks for having me here tonight. I, first of all, would like to throw Mr. Lacassi a bone and say I was grateful to see him here. He was one of the three that made it, and I think that speaks volumes that he did that. I assume he drove and didn't take a private jet. That's the beginning. When this guy gets going, we're really going to hear some. No, tongue in cheek, I say that. It was good of him to come. It would have been good to see all three, Ken. Inspiring education. Look, this is become such a heated discussion. Just the words "inspiring education" are positive alone, aren't they? I mean, isn't this what we all want for our children? Inspiring in education. Don't we want teachers to play that role, to be more than a guide on the side? That's exactly what we want. I think we can all tell stories from our childhood about the impact that teachers have in our lives. It seems like they have gone forward, the government has gone forward without checking with the people that make these things happen. And that is a big frustration. It's one that I hear from teachers and parents alike, that if you're going to change a curriculum, clearly you're going to have to hear from people in the process.
Talk about standardized tests.
Standardized tests, obviously the government has just made a change with standardized tests and gone to SLAs over PATs. We believe, I'm with a party that believes that kids need to be tested. I will tell you emphatically that I do not believe they should be tested so you can compare those rankings from school to school. There are various socioeconomic differences in schools. I represent a place in Chestermere Rockview a large number of ELL students. As you can appreciate, a lot of new Canadians. There are so many different issues. When you just pit school against school, and that's the reason for doing your testing, I don't think you're doing that for a positive reason at all. I do want to see, as a parent, I do want to see that a school is making strides and making improvements. And I want to know all the factors that go into it. So I would agree with Thomas's assessment on the point about the Fraser Institute. It's been very divisive. And, I'd like to see tests so that we can see kids improving and that we can see the system improve.
So, Kent, talk to me. Inspiring education, transformation, standardized tests.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank all the teachers here for being here this summer and taking part out of your busy schedules to take part in revitalizing your careers and setting the direction going forward for the new year. I would like to say that this is not my first ATA summer conference. In fact, my first was in 1974 when I came here with my parents and my father, who was a district representative, I believe, from McAllister. And I'm proud to say that this is about my 5th summer conference. And again, I am accompanied here by my dad, Hehr, who was president of Local 38 some years ago, and it's great to have him here today. But in terms of inspiring education, well, it's a great document. It reads pretty well. I think we all get excited, but we have to look at more as to how the real PC have handled the education class. And in my view, over the last 20 years, it's been tepid at best. Again, I'm glad that Thomas was here, but frankly, if you look at the way the Progressive Conservative Party has handled public education over the course of the last 20 years, frankly, it couldn't have been easy for him to be here. They have not built schools in those 20 years. Look at the promise of 50 schools in the last election. None of those will be built before 2016. Look at the way we were told we were going to get predictable, sustainable funding. Well, that hasn't come. Really, we should be having an extra 2,500 teachers in our classrooms right now. Instead, what we're having is kids crammed into classrooms and with you guys trying to do extra support. This government also, let's face it, they believe in choice, which is separating kids in private schools, charter schools alike. They're not committed to public education. They're not committed to the equality of opportunity, which was brought up here at the start of your slide by President Ramsicker. So if you really ask if this party has the backs of public education, come on. They've been kidding you for 20 years. And I believe that Thomas can really turn on a dime and erase the last 14 years of his being in government, of him championing every decision that they've made, of him saying, what I heard here tonight was that he's forgotten the role he has played in the government in 14 years that, in my view, has not supported public education And I think you guys need to remember that.
I'm sure he's glad to give you a wonderful candidacy.
Nevertheless, I understand that any egalitarian society bases itself on a public education system, and that is what will go forward, whether you're here in Alberta or whether you're off somewhere else.
So Derron, what are your views? What on the issues of transformation and testing and inspiring
and everything
education?
else. First of all, I want to say well said, Kent. I agree with you, and I also want to thank all of you for being here. I'm the MLA for Edmonton-Beverly-Clareview, was elected 2 years ago, and very proudly was given the education portfolio last year, a year ago. I am a teacher by trade. I taught high school for 6 years, and education is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So there's a lot to say and very little time to say it in, but you know, I think first and foremost, you know, whether it's inspiring education or transformative education, you as teachers need to be recognized as professionals. You are trained, you know what you're doing, you know better than anyone what your students need to be successful. But what you need is support in the form of training, resources, extra supports in your classroom, and bottom line is dollars. And so, you know, although I respect Thomas Lukasik, it frustrates me that 43 years of PC rule, and he's talking about starting over and let's start this new relationship, when, as Ken pointed out, he's been a part of the cabinet for 14 years. He was your education minister, our education minister, for a number of years. You know how many new schools were built as his time as education minister? None. Part of the reason that we have such a shortage of space in schools is because this PC party dragged its feet and refused to build the schools that are needed. As you all know, you've got class sizes busting at the seams. You've got students with a variety of needs in your classrooms, which is great in the concept of inclusive education. But if you're not given the adequate supports to help each of them be successful, we are doing them a disservice, and we're taking away from all students. And so you need to be properly supported. When we talk about stable, predictable funding, I don't know if you read a tweet that I fired out when Thomas said, you know, if anybody says they can do that, they've got a crystal ball. No, the reality is, if we actually addressed our revenue problem by bringing back progressive income tax, which we can talk about later on, but actually average Albertans pay more here in this province at a 10% flat tax than you would in other jurisdictions. Address the royalties, address our tax regime, increase our corporate taxes by a mere 1% would give us the dollars to be able to have stable, predictable funding for education for you and your students.
I'm not going to go in the same order. I'm just going to jump around, but I think that you've had some comments, all of you have had some comments that beg the question about the role of the teaching profession. You've all touched on it a little bit. I'd like to talk about have your comments on the fallout of the Task Force on Teaching Excellence from the beginning of May and continued into this summer. What are your views on the task force and its recommendations? Not the politics of it as much as what the task force said in its recommendations. I think you heard Thomas say there's some good things in that can be worked on. There's some things that are problematical. Can you be a bit specific about where you see that task force report and the recommendations, which you support and which you don't? Kent.
Well, I'll talk in general. There's some good recommendations in there, but it's essentially when you look more at the heart of the report, what they're really trying to do, and that's separate the teaching profession from the way it has been structured and the role of the Alberta Teacher Association and its current format. In my view, that is the primary motive of that document that was meant to separate the ATA from its role as bargaining agent, as well as its representation as a curriculum developer and leader of our education system. And that was the primary motive of that report, and you can dress up the 27 other recommendations or whatever they were any way you want, but that was the goal of that report. And if you look at that as the goal of the report, in my view, that report should not see the light of day. Well, okay, we can work on some of the other stuff. But that's primarily going to happen in between negotiations with the ATA and the minister. So that stuff can be resolved internally. So the goal of that was to separate the ATA and its professional responsibility.
So you would see that in that characterization of the report, you see this then as a fundamental issue of breach of trust.
Well, a breach of trust, well, they...
When I say breach of trust, not in the legal sense, in that with trust with profession, right?
In my view, the goal of this government, through their minister, Jeff Johnson, was to try to change fundamentally the role of the Alberta Teacher Association. And in my view, it's a role that is wrong, and that the government is now running from because they don't have the strength to pull it through. But don't kid yourself. Just because they're in trouble now does not mean 2 years from now, if you re-elect them, that they will not come back and drive this type of stuff through again. They've done it for 20 years.
Derron, what's your thought?
Well, okay, so the task force, I mean, it was set up in bad faith from day one. When you look at who was invited to the task force, who was on the task force, the fact that they intentionally left the ATA out and the voice of teachers, when, again, at the end of the day, folks, who knows the profession and how to work with kids, how to teach, how to learn better than anybody else? It's teachers. And so the fact that they were excluded from day one, for me, it was offensive and speaks, and I agree with Kent to the motivation behind this. I had a conversation with Jeff Johnson in the legislature, off record, before the task force came into effect, and he talked about...
It's not off the record.
Not valid. But that's okay, you need to hear this, because again, Jeff was very proud of a study that was done in Saskatchewan, and I know the ATA is well aware of this, where that study talked about breaking the union from the professional body, and also talked about merit pay, which that wasn't specifically stated in the task force, but when you read through it, my view is that there are undertones of merit pay, which is flawed for so many reasons. Yet again, my concern is this government is, and this report was a direct attack on teachers, and again, is trying to strip away from you the professional side was a complete lack of respect for teachers as professionals.
Bruce, I'm going to start interrupting you guys a little bit, okay? Because I want to make sure we're going to get...
I'm a former English teacher. I could go for hours.
You want to take me on as a lawyer? That's why we allow you to ask the questions, not answer them. Okay. Bruce?
I noticed you put the former journalist in the middle to handle you two. Interesting. Well, Derron hit on some points that I would agree with wholeheartedly, Ken. And first of all, I would say, I think in many ways, it's not a big secret that the governing party currently painted us as, the bad guy at the last election. And we did some things there to put ourselves in that role from acknowledging, okay? Really, really silly things. And that's, sure, but you know what? It's fine if you did own it, right? Own it and move on and grow. And so, that effectively launched them, I believe, into this position where they had such a majority. Nobody would have guessed they'd had 61 seats going in the last election. And I think a lot of people had buyer's remorse. But to the point that you asked on the task force is simple. If I needed to fix an engine in my car, or develop a new engine, or come up with something, wouldn't I ask a mechanic about that? I mean, wouldn't you go to the experts of the field if you wanted to improve it? That's first and foremost, and Derron mentioned that. And I find that very disrespectful to your profession, that wasn't done. And secondly, I would say that what was so wrong? Where's the evidence that there was a giant problem? And if that's the case, as a parent, I'm concerned too, just as you would be in the classroom. But I never did see that this task force needed to be the focus of the Alberta government. What I saw was the Alberta government getting an awful lot of bad headlines and needing to change the channel. And what it wants to do, inevitably, is command and control. That's what the Alberta government wants to do. So put its people in place so that they can then look at the role of the teacher and see that you're doing things according to how they want them done. And if you're not, you can bet you're going to be blacklisted. And that's what our concern was and many others about what they're doing with the Teachers Task Force. It shouldn't be the focus of the Alberta government right now. If there are issues, then okay, we can deal with them. And I know you can and you would too. But the issues right now in Alberta education, first and foremost, let's start building some schools. We're 2.5 years into this election, to this mandate for this government, and to my knowledge, not one school has been started. So, and that's a huge problem, Ken. I mean, that's all the other things that we're discussing tonight. You know, they're big issues. But if we had more space, and if we had, more seats for kids, we wouldn't have to pile fully in a classroom.
I want to ask each one of you a fundamental question. Thomas had an awful lot more time, and I think we got the answer to this question from his answers in the time that he had, although it wasn't asked directly. So I still think it's a fair question. If you don't think it's a fair question, take me on. Is it you as a person, you as an individual, as an elected representative, what do you see the purpose of public education? What's the fundamental purpose of public education? Bruce?
Well, I'm a parent, Ken. I want to prepare my child for the path. I mean, I want my child to be the brightest, the most well-rounded, the most creative, the most cared for, compassionate, forward-thinking young person that can come out of the school system. And that's why these people are here in the summer months, because they want the same thing for my child. That's why my children in the public education system. That's why I went to the public education system.
Is it Derron?
I think the purpose of education is to teach them to be citizens in life, and so it's not just teaching as in passing knowledge; it's preparing them for whatever path they choose. Education, and this is the issue that I have when education becomes so prescriptive, or in my view, with the way that the PCs want to take education, is to basically train workers for the future, which is part of the reason I have such an issue with oil companies sitting on the curriculum redesign panels. I've been opposed to that from day one, because again, we want to teach our students how to be like whole people. So they're not just learning education or certain skills for a job, they're also learning what it means to be a citizen, their responsibilities, and what it means to be a good person, so that regardless of what they go into and what path they choose, they have the basic skills, they've got the critical thinking skills, they're able to ask questions, to solve problems, to think for themselves, so that they will be successful no matter where they go.
Okay. It's similar to Derron's. The education system is designed to bring children into full citizens in a democratic society who understand the democratic system, how public health care, public education, how their lives are built and structured, and how to take part in them, and how to have the tools of reading, writing, arithmetic, and worldviews on social studies and like that's going to allow them to take part and lead vibrant lives, whether that is through the job they choose, or how they develop their families, or how they live their lives. And I think the best place to do it is through a well-funded public education system, and that's what we should continue to strive for. And you teachers here are at the forefront of that, and do a yeoman's service in shaping young minds.
Do all of your parties have positions on the issue of choice in education, charter schools and private schools? It's relevant to this crowd, obviously. What is the position of your parties, and is that your personal position as well?
You want to start?
Sure.
Well, public education should be publicly funded, publicly delivered, period. I mean, that's been the stance of the Alberta NDP ever since I can remember. As far as if private schools want to exist, then go ahead and exist and pay for it yourselves. You should not be taking from the public purse. The issue that I have today with charter schools, and when they came into inception in the 80s, they were meant as research-based schools. Now, this was the best idea that the PCs could come up with, but the issue that I have is our public education system is more than capable of doing that. And we have specialized schools within our public system, whether it's dealing with different faith-based, whether it's dealing with languages, whether it's dealing with specialized instruction or specialized focuses. And so the NDP would bring the private schools that do serve certain niches into the public system. The ones that are private because they're elitist or because of whatever other reason, again, go off on your own, do your own thing.
Okay.
But our system should be publicly funded, publicly delivered.
That Johnny Reed song that Mark played, it was so nice at the very beginning, how we want to change the world. He also does one that says, "Darling, I'm feeling kind of lonesome."
Only on the phone.
Yeah, I think my position on this topic is probably relevant to that Johnny Reed song, but
The second one, not the
yeah, the second one.
Well, fess up, come on.
Yeah, I will, and that's why I'm here, Ken.
I know, thanks for being here.
This is where we're at with this, okay? We obviously believe in choice in education. We very much do. And that every parent has a right to choose, where their child goes. And I know some would say, well, then have them fund it. Well, there are 60 or 70 independent schools or thereabouts in the province of Alberta. There's roughly 30,000 students attending these schools. They're not all Weber academies. They're not all charging $10,000 tuition. Some of them for special needs. This gentleman used to teach at one at Inner City High that helped kids that really needed a break, and I think applaud you for that, Derron. And there are some for special needs and arts, and there are numerous schools in place, and we like that option. We think it's what makes our system so strong. I also like the Edmonton choice model, whereas was alluded to earlier, there are faith-based schools and other niche schools in the public system. I think that is tremendous, and would like to see more of that offered. At the end of the day, I just want to see variety for kids so that they can get the absolute best education that's coming to them. And if there are inequities, Ken, in the system, I have always said there is no reason why conversations can't be had as to with everybody around the table, not to satisfy one group when 4 others aren't there, or to go somewhere else and satisfy that group. Then everyone around the table can have that discussion.
Kent, what's the Liberal position on public education and charter choice?
Well, thanks for the question, and I do want to point out that, hey, 2.5 years ago there may have been some difference between the Wildrose and the PCs. I can assure you, after sitting there for the last 2.5 years, they're exactly the same. They really are. It's just a strange divorce, and we see that right now with this type of question. And they've adopted the same policies on education, the same policy on the fiscal structure. So if you want to keep banging your head on the wall, well, try these guys. It's very similar to what you're doing. But they are no different. One is no better than the other. So at least you got that going for you, Bruce. So you see. But anyway, in terms of private schools, our party has not had any truck nor trade with private schools. We believe that there should be lots of choice in a publicly funded education system, and we think that is the way to go in any free and democratic society. Of course, you can have a private school, but you can pay for that privilege out of your own pocketbook. We believe it tends to divide our citizenry, and we'd like to see our students in our neighborhood school going forward on that concept. And in fact,
we got it.
All right. There we go.
Well, we got very little. We mostly got it on me.
Yeah, it's love and democracy.
Okay.
We're gonna close shortly, and I'm gonna give each of you an opportunity to do some closing remarks. But I'm very curious about this question, and I acknowledge that it's unfair, but I think it's vital. We all talked about citizenship as being one of the major roles and functions of public education, and how we become better, more critical thinkers and become more capable. But also one of those tricks in that citizenship and that in growing public education is how do we work more collaboratively in high-performing teams? We're not isolated anymore in terms of how our work's going, especially teachers see this. I want to know, in a couple of weeks, we're going to, as a province, whoever participates in this is going to select someone to be a premier. It's been in the past, there's been efforts made to make the legislature less acrimonious, less divisive, less childlike, and they've all failed. There's adults in that room, but not enough. in the general sense of what's going on because of the adversarial system. We're going to have 2 years. The unfair question is that I'm fascinated by. You're going to have to work with those people for the next 2 years. Who would you prefer to see as the winner of the war? It's in the context of having to work with them. It's in the context of having to work with them. Yeah.
Sure. And you know, I've said
It's
this.
a real question.
I've said this before. I mean, you know what? My position, honestly, is there is very little difference between the PC candidates, and every time a PC election or election, a leadership elections come along, they try to rebrand themselves as something.
I'm going to abuse the chair. I want your answer to the question and your reason for it. I don't want your preamble. So who would you prefer to work with? You're going to have to work with one of them. If you had your druthers, which one would it be and why?
None of the above. They're all bad.
It's not a practical answer. That's the problem, right?
Well, you know, the challenge is this. Okay, so I've worked with limited wise with Rick McAllister, Thomas.
If you want to say, Ken, it's an unfair question, I choose not to answer it, I'll respect that.
Can I take it back?
You go ahead.
I'm going to give that, Bruce, y'all come back to you.
Okay, I'm going to give you some time to come up with another way into this.
You can weave your way into it.
We'll see if mine works, and if it doesn't, try something else. I say to you with the utmost sincerity, it wouldn't matter which one won. I would work with any of them, and that's how we all ought to approach it. But picking any of them, Ken, is impossible for me, and the reason is I believe no matter where we live on this planet, that 43 years of government by one party is a major problem. I don't care who you take over the three of us and our parties, but just to conclude, because it's not even, I don't label all of the PC candidates bad people. Thomas, any of them, I don't. But the bureaucracy that has become in 40 plus years has created this monster, and it needs to be changed so that we can move forward in Alberta and start listening to Albertans instead of telling them what we want to do.
So the question is, it's an unfair question.
Well, no, I'd agree with any of them, but I'm not picking any of them.
It's an unfair question.
Does Ken have anything to add?
I actually thought the answer by Bruce was a very fair answer. After 43 years, it's no longer a question of which one can or should. It simply should be over. And frankly, I made the mistake of last election running around saying you can't vote for a Liberal or a New Democrat, and if for some reason you are misguided and chose another one of those parties, well, you know, I thought the PCs would be better. I will not say that this election. You will not see me say that. Okay, but I believe it will be better off for this province to move forward on some other uncharted course, because we've seen this right away.
Yes, you can, and then I'll further acknowledge it was an unfair question. Very good one.
Sure. Well, no, this isn't so much another entry to answer it, because I agree with what both Kent and Bruce said. Bruce said it very well, that we will work with whoever is there. But I can tell you this much. The most shocking moment I've had in the legislature in the last 2.5 years was when, time after time, opposition parties, and I'll give credit to all three, put forward reasonable amendments to strengthen a bill for the betterment of Alberta, okay? And there are times that we've all stood up and defended each other's amendments because they were good. It's not based on who put it forward, it's the idea, the merit of the idea. I was told, and we get ours voted down 99.999%. I was told by several cabinet ministers off the record, they said, you know what, Derron, your amendment is reasonable and it makes sense, but you know what, we can't accept it. You know why? And I said, why? And they said, because it's coming from you guys. Yeah. And I'm dead serious that has happened, I'm sure, to both Kent and the Liberals and Bruce and the Wildrose, and there is nothing more disgusting than when a party talks about working with other parties and other MLAs for the betterment of the province and refuses to acknowledge and credit good idea. And actually, they don't even have to credit us, just adopt it.
I think that's a good point to close on. I smell democracy in the air.
Hey.
30 seconds of closing because I want to keep you to 30 seconds because you are now between this crowd and the bar. You can go last this time. And I'll start with Ken. Okay. And I'm holding you to 30 seconds.
Hey, just thanks to the teachers in this room for going into schools every day and making our society better. The work you do is truly appreciated by me as not only a student when I was in the public education system, but I know because of what you do every day, you're making a difference in the way Alberta is going to go forward, and I applaud you for your efforts.
Derron?
You know, I've said time and time again that our greatest resource in this province are our people, and we need to invest in our people. And again, you know, there's not a day that goes by I don't miss being in the classroom, and I absolutely applaud all of the work that you do. The one thing I just wanted to mention, and to thank you all for coming, is one thing we didn't talk about, is that the Alberta NDP has a leadership race going on right now, simultaneously of the PCs. And Rachel and David and Rod will be here on Thursday, but I really encourage you to come out and to talk to them because, as Kent said, and this is where we agree, if we want to truly change the face of politics in this province, then we need a viable change and a viable alternative.
I know many of you are parents also, and you know, there's nothing like the innocence of your children. And when they come home and tell you about their day at school and something about their teacher, and they absolutely idolize you, and you do make a difference and you do leave a mark. And that's why I find it so offensive when the Minister of Education and his cronies say, we need to completely transform education in Alberta. No, we don't. Are there pressure points? Yes. And can we have a dialogue about them? Yes, and yes, we should. But we do not need to transform and radically change the education system. We do need to radically transform and change the government in charge of the education system.
I think your dedication and professionalism has been recognized from the stage in many, many ways and acknowledged. I would ask you to recognize the professionalism and dedication of the people on the stage tonight.